The love triangle that turned deadly, a true American tragedy. This story takes place in the peaceful, sun-soaked suburbs of Boise, Idaho, a place where people went about their business quietly, families raised children with aspirations, and neighbors waved at one another with warm smiles. The small community was tight-knit, with everyone knowing everyone's business, or at least they thought they did. But behind closed doors, in the private lives of three ordinary people, a volatile love triangle was slowly boiling over into a catastrophic disaster. At the center of this tragic tale was Emily Pearson, a 32-year-old woman who had recently gone through a tough divorce. She was trying to rebuild her life, working as a nurse at St. Luke's Hospital, where she was respected for her dedication and compassion. Emily wasn't looking for love right after her divorce, but love, or something like it, found her in the form of two men, Ryan Granger and Jason Miller. Ryan, 35, was a charming but troubled mechanic who lived just a few blocks from Emily's home. He had a rough edge about him, with tattoos running down his arms and a quick wit that made him both attractive and dangerous. He was the kind of man who had seen the darker side of life, run-ins with the law, bar fights, and a failed marriage of his own. But beneath that tough exterior, he had a vulnerable heart, one that Emily found irresistible. Jason, on the other hand, was everything Ryan was not. At 37, Jason was a successful insurance broker, clean-cut, reliable, and well-liked by everyone. He was Emily's high school sweetheart, the one who got away when life led them on different paths. Jason had recently moved back to Boise after a business venture in Seattle and was eager to reconnect with Emily. He had never truly gotten over her, and when they started talking again, the old flames reignited. Emily found herself caught between these two men, Ryan, with his raw passion and bad boy allure, and Jason, with his stability and deep-rooted history with her. At first, she thought she could handle it. She liked the thrill of dating both men without making any serious commitments. After all, she had just gotten out of a messy marriage, and she wasn't ready to settle down again so soon. But what started as harmless fun quickly spiraled out of control. Ryan, though charming, was deeply insecure. He had been burned in relationships before, and when he found out about Jason, his jealousy consumed him. At first, he confronted Emily calmly, asking her to choose. Emily reassured him that she just needed time, that she wasn't ready to decide yet. But Ryan wasn't the type of man to wait around patiently. Jason, too, became suspicious when Emily started canceling dates last minute, avoiding his calls, and growing distant. He had known her long enough to sense that something was off. One night, he followed her and saw her with Ryan. It was like a punch to the gut. He couldn't believe that after everything they had been through, she would choose someone like Ryan over him. Tension was building between the two men, though neither had directly confronted the other. Ryan's jealousy grew darker, and Jason's heartache was becoming unbearable. Emily, stuck in the middle, kept telling herself she could manage it, that she would figure it out soon. But time was running out. One fateful evening, everything came crashing down. It was a warm summer night in late August. Emily had been drinking, trying to numb the anxiety gnawing at her from both sides. She had invited Ryan over to talk, hoping to calm him down and figure out what to do next. But things didn't go as planned. Jason, unable to let go, had been drinking too. He had convinced himself that if he just showed up, he could win Emily back once and for all. Around 9 p.m., he drove to Emily's house, his heart pounding with a mix of hope and anger. When Jason arrived, he saw Ryan's car parked outside. The sight sent him over the edge. He knocked on the door furiously, and when Emily answered, she was startled to find Jason standing there, wild-eyed and fuming. "What's he doing here?" Jason demanded, his voice shaking. Before Emily could answer, Ryan appeared in the doorway behind her, his expression smug, as if daring Jason to do something. "You shouldn't have come here, man," Ryan said, his voice low and dangerous. Jason pushed past Emily, confronting Ryan head-on. The two men squared off, their rage finally boiling over into the open. "You think you can just walk into her life and take what's mine?" Jason shouted. "She's not yours," Ryan shot back, stepping closer, his fists clenched. "You lost her a long time ago." Emily, panicking, tried to step between them, but it was too late. In the heat of the moment, tempers flared, and the two men started throwing punches. What began as a fistfight quickly escalated into something far more dangerous. In a fit of uncontrollable rage, Ryan grabbed a wrench from the kitchen counter, a tool he had brought with him from his car, and swung it at Jason. The blow landed with a sickening thud on Jason's head, and he crumpled to the floor, unconscious and bleeding. Emily screamed, rushing to Jason's side, trying to stop the bleeding, but it was clear that the damage was severe. Ryan, panting, stood over them, his face a mixture of shock and horror as the reality of what he had done set in. "I didn't mean to," Ryan started, but Emily cut him off, her voice trembling with rage and fear. "Get out," she screamed. "You've killed him. Get out." Ryan, now panicked, stumbled out the door and fled into the night. Jason was rushed to the hospital, but the damage was too extensive. He never regained consciousness and died 2 days later from his injuries. The news of his death sent shockwaves through the community, and Ryan was soon arrested and charged with second-degree murder. As for Emily, she was left devastated, haunted by the guilt of what had happened. She had never wanted things to go this far, but in her indecision, she had unwittingly set the stage for tragedy. The love triangle that had started with passion and excitement had ended in death and despair. Ryan was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and Emily, unable to cope with the guilt, eventually moved away from Boise, leaving behind the painful memories of a love triangle gone horribly wrong. The tragic end of Jason's life and Ryan's imprisonment sent shockwaves through Boise and beyond. The news outlets picked up on the story, labeling it the suburban love triangle murder, and it became a sensation. The media painted vivid pictures of a quiet town disrupted by violent passion, a seemingly ordinary woman at the heart of an extraordinary catastrophe. Neighbors, friends, and co-workers who knew Emily, Jason, and Ryan struggled to reconcile the people they thought they knew with the horrors that unfolded. Jason had always been the golden boy, well-liked, reliable, the one everyone expected to settle down with Emily. Ryan, despite his rougher edges, had never shown any signs of such violent tendencies, at least to most people. And Emily, the gentle nurse who cared for her patients with so much compassion, suddenly seemed like a stranger. How could she have been caught in the middle of something so destructive? Could she have prevented it? After Jason's death, Emily's life spiraled into a dark, lonely place. She couldn't escape the blame that gnawed at her. No matter how many times people told her it wasn't her fault, that she didn't cause Jason's death, she couldn't shake the guilt. She had kept both men on a string, enjoying the attention, the thrill of being wanted, and now one of them was dead because of it. Her work suffered. Patients noticed she wasn't the same upbeat, caring nurse she used to be. She began missing shifts, isolating herself, and drinking more than ever before. The hospital put her on leave, and soon after, she resigned. She couldn't face the judgmental glances from her co-workers anymore. Every time she walked through the hospital, she could hear the whispers, see the pity in people's eyes. Emily had become the woman who destroyed 2 lives, one literally, the other figuratively. With no job, no friends, and a broken spirit, Emily packed up and left Boise. She moved to a small town in Washington state, hoping to start over, but the memories followed her. Every time she closed her eyes, she could still hear Jason's voice, see the blood spilling from his head, and feel the weight of her choices crushing her. Her family tried to help her, but they too were haunted by the tragedy. Emily's parents never fully understood what happened, and they were devastated by the media attention that had turned their daughter's private life into a public scandal. Eventually, even they couldn't reach her. Ryan, meanwhile, faced his own demons behind bars. He hadn't intended to kill Jason. That was the narrative his defense attorney had pushed in court, an argument that spared him from life in prison but couldn't absolve him from the guilt he now carried. The image of Jason collapsing at his feet, the panic in Emily's eyes, replayed over and over in his mind during the long, quiet nights in his cell. Prison changed Ryan. The bravado he had once carried was stripped away. He became a shell of the man he once was, consumed by regret and self-loathing. He spent his days in solitude, refusing to join any of the prison's social cliques or gangs. He didn't want friends, didn't want comfort. He believed he didn't deserve any of it. Letters from Emily arrived occasionally, but he never opened them. He didn't need to hear from her to know that she was suffering too. He figured she hated him as much as he hated himself. Besides, what could she say that would undo the damage? He had ruined her life as much as he had ruined his own. Though Ryan's time in prison dragged on, the outside world moved forward. The media lost interest, people stopped talking about the case, and eventually, both Ryan and Jason's names faded from the public's memory. But for those closest to them, the pain never truly went away. Years passed, and Emily tried to rebuild her life, but the weight of the past never let her breathe fully. She moved from job to job, struggling to keep up appearances. In her late 30s, she found herself more isolated than ever before. Love, which had once seemed like the answer to her loneliness, was now something she couldn't even think about without feeling nauseous. Every time she met someone new, she remembered how horribly things had gone wrong the last time, and she pushed them away. Eventually, Emily stopped trying to connect with people altogether. She lived alone, kept to herself, and avoided forming any close relationships. The only company she had was the ghost of Jason, who haunted her dreams, and the occasional news clipping she found online about Ryan, still serving time for his crime. On the 10th anniversary of Jason's death, Emily did something she hadn't done in years. She visited his grave. She stood there in silence, staring at the headstone, wondering how things could have been different. 1,000 what-ifs ran through her mind, but none of them gave her peace. That night, alone in her apartment, Emily swallowed a handful of pills. The pain had become too much, the burden of her guilt too heavy to carry any longer. She left no note, no explanation, just a broken woman who had never truly recovered from the choices she had made. News of Emily's death made its way back to Boise, reopening old wounds for those who had known her, Jason and Ryan. The once quiet love triangle that had turned deadly all those years ago was back in the public consciousness, though briefly, as people reflected on how lives can be shattered by jealousy, indecision, and uncontrolled emotions. Ryan, still in prison, learned of Emily's death through a letter from his sister. He didn't react at first, but that night, he wept for the first time since the day Jason died. Emily's death was the final nail in the coffin of their tragic love story, a story that had cost 3 people their lives, one way or another. In the end, the love triangle didn't just claim one victim, it destroyed all 3. What had started as a complicated, messy romance had turned into an American tragedy, with no winners, only heartbreak and death. The lesson, though often ignored, was painfully clear. When love turns into obsession and jealousy takes root, the consequences can be devastating.